All right. Hey, that slides forward. That accidentally slid forward. Does it lock in place? I like that it slides forward. Could you imagine you have a styrofoam cup here and then I just got in awkwardly and I pinched my cup? That would be a problem. Welcome back to Munro Live. Now, you may notice the walls on either side of us here today. Sometimes we have customers that are perfectly fine with Munro Live or other people seeing the products that we are helping them with. Sometimes we have customers that want everything to remain anonymous or confidential. So we respect their wishes. So because of that, you'll notice that we have not had very many videos in our shop for at least the last 2 to 3 months. Most all of them have been in our showroom area. We are just now finally able to cut out a small amount of space for us to do a review within the shop. So currently I have 5 completely disassembled vehicles on this side of me and not vehicles on the other side of me. Here at Munro, we do work with many different types of products, many different types of industries, but I can't talk about them. Today, we're gonna be talking about the Toyota bZ4X. First thing I have to say is I hate the name. Now, I don't like a name that requires that much effort to say. Even though it's just individual numbers and letters, the movement of your mouth, the bZ4X, it's too long, even though it's just letters. Now, in looking at this vehicle, a fully electric vehicle, we're gonna do an interior review, but I do wanna mention a few things on the exterior because I think a couple of the exterior styles translate into the interior. Now, one of the previous videos that we did, I was picking on a vehicle because of its color scheme and how they broke up a two-tone color scheme. This one, we have a gray and a black, and I think that they have broken up this color scheme okay for the vehicle, but there's 2 things with the styling that I would like to make mention of. Look at this dark gray to black band here. This is not masked and painted after one coat is painted. This is actually an applique, which is sitting over top of the other. So those are all layered individual components. Now, if I was talking from a lean design principle, that's kind of annoying because basically I've already made a stamping or an injection molding of that size, and now I'm making another one which is just layering over. However, this is more efficient getting a 2-tone finish because trying to mask within any type of an OEM plant is a pain. High likelihood for error, scrap rate, and high cycle time. Now, in looking at the rest of the body, it was pointed out to me, looking at the different faces. So the character lines that are running through this body, they're very sharp, they're very pronounced, and they separate the light differently. So the light that we have coming overhead, it almost makes it look like it's a different color due to the shading, due to the reflection. I do like that styling feature. Now, whether the rest of the vehicle is something that I think is attractive, I don't care, I don't want to say. I just like the styling feature and the breakup in materials. But let's start to talk about the interior. And we're gonna start talking about the interior by looking at it from the exterior. Look at this door panel, which is being exposed from the exterior. Here, they have raised the height of the door panel so that it continues on and connects into the IP. But in order for them to raise that height, they have to have this secondary interior panel, which is now filling in through this side, creating a split line, which is visible here. I don't think that that is an appropriate feature. It's an expensive feature. It's hard to manage within an assembly. And the only thing that they're really gaining is the connection to the IP, which I think there are other problems with that connection to the IP. So if it were me and I was consulting with Toyota when they were coming up with this design, I would suggest do everything that you can to not have this reveal. Move your body up or move your interior down. One of the two, but I don't like having that type of a step. Now, unfortunately, this is an all black vehicle. And again, I don't like all black vehicles for reviews because it's really hard to see all of the detail. So black door panel, black IP, black center console, black carpeting, black overhead, black seats, black, 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 black. But in looking at the different materials themselves, this upper band, this is a wrapped surface, so this is a skin over top of here. But this is not really a foamed skin. This is just providing a skin surface, which is slightly softer than if this were just molded color plastic. We saw that on the Rivian back panel. At first, I thought it was molded color plastic, but there was actually a skin applied over hard plastic. Now our armrest area, this is cushioned. So we have a similar skin, but with a foam backing, which wraps and waterfalls around the armrest. Closing out on the end, hard injection molded plastic. Okay, piano black. I'm not going to say anything more about piano black, but what I do like about this part, this is very, very integrated. It looks like it's one piece, but it's not. Our switch bank pad here is actually separated from the insert around the handle area. The rest, all just hard injection molding. That may be a painted surface, but it's kind of hard to tell without scratching it, and I'm not going to scratch it. Going below, it's all just injection molding. All right, so if those are the materials that I would normally be looking at, I would think about what are my processes. Is this going to be an IMG? Is this going to be a press bond process? Is it going to be automatic wrapping, direct injection mold? I normally try and tie the process to what I think the selling price of the vehicle should be. This is a $52,000 vehicle. Now, in a lot of the reviews that I've done, I've tried to talk about those processes and talk about the tooling that is required. And I've come to a kind of a realization. We were going from vehicles that were $35,000 to $80,000, that styling was different, but the processes and the materials were exactly the same. And it comes to the point where you're saying, if I have the exact same material content and the only difference is in the look, why would someone purposely downgrade a vehicle or upgrade a vehicle just on look if the content or the technology is the same? Again, from a $35,000 to an $80,000. And I was trying to mentally put it into my head, like, well, what would I compare this to? And I basically came up with the analogy of saying that our interiors are basically the Taco Bell of interiors. There's very few ingredients just put together in a different way. I thought that was kind of funny, but it does upset me when I see those types of issues. The fact that you can have a $35,000 with the same technology, same material construction as an $80,000. So when I was looking at the seat, I was trying to, again, look at the construction and what I would have to do in a plant in order to make this. All right, so we have a perf material, 3 panels of perf. This wraps around the front edge. That's very efficient material utilization and also cuts down on the labor without having a secondary panel that's wrapping around the front. We have these side bolsters. Now this is the same material, but look at the stitching. This is a French stitch. And you'll see that French stitch runs all the way into the joint. This is a single-sided decoration. Some people would call it a deck seam. But look, it stops early. It does not go into the joint. So if I were in my plant, these 2 panels have to go through a flatbed sewing machine to make the joint seam between them. Then this subassembly goes to a French stitch machine, which is applying this top stitch. Then this goes back to the single machine to make this join. Then we would make a join here on that same single stitch machine. Then it's going back to a single decorative stitching machine for this seam to be applied, and that seam is going to stop. Now the problem with stopping a seam, a decorative seam, within a part, normally that means that you have to hand tie that. So we are going back and forth between 3 different machines and then also possibly having a hand tie operation just to do this piece of a bolster. In general, this looks very simple, and I think that it is for pattern breakup. But when I'm looking at the amount of back and forth labor that I'm going to have to do to execute this, it starts to add cost. Now the problem that we have is when the designers are first designing this look, they're not really thinking as much about the assembly line labor costs and the assembly line stations that are going to be required. So this is one thing that I would have recommended not doing, but it is something that they decided to go with. All right, I am a big guy, and admittedly, I have not adjusted this vehicle to fit my body, so it's a little tight for me. Looking at this IP and looking at the cluster, there's an interesting look here. You'll see that from the steering wheel and the steering wheel shroud, we are sitting very high, very proud of surface, lifting away from the IP. And we have these two walls that are coming up, connecting to our display screen or our cluster screen, and providing somewhat of a pocket. Many years ago, I was in a research group and we were looking at this concept actually for air ducts. We were having one central air duct blowing towards the screen and relying on the fact that air will normally follow a surface to split, come around, and then vent at the occupant. Now, in computer simulations, the thing actually worked, but I still did not believe that it would ever really work. So then I asked myself when I saw this shape, is that what they did here? No, they didn't. The reason why they have that gap is for the steering wheel adjustment. Because they have that adjustability, they had to create that gap, which kind of makes it look like it's elevated. So these panels, basically those are just painted injection molded plastics. Might be fairly easy to clean, but what are they really doing? What am I gaining other than look? They almost feel brittle. So I don't think that they would be taking much force, but I don't really know if we're getting any type of a benefit other than this look. And it would be questionable whether or not this look is appropriate to you. But look at this. We have a fabric instrument panel. I am not opposed to fabrics, but fabrics have a problem, specifically when we have a patterned fabric like this. This fabric has very linear lines, and I can guarantee you when the fabric itself was made coming off the loom, all those lines were straight. But the problem is we're taking a flat, straight material and we're trying to apply it to a very curved geometric shape. And in doing that, all of these linear lines get distorted. So let's take a few gauge measurements, kind of, shall we? Let's look here. This seam, this lighter color seam, it mostly tracks and follows this edge, but as we come out, it gets farther and farther away. So basically it is 3 rows or columns away from the air vent from where it started. It's even more drastic on the outside. These seams actually have a hook or a curve in them as they come in and meet that air vent. This is something that you just have to expect. If you're trying to apply this type of material to this type of geometry, those shapes are going to happen. Now the problem is, those are uncontrollable. Depending on how this fabric was laid up on the table when it was cut, these seams could be slightly off one direction or the other, and the amount of stretch that is happening when they actually glue this to the substrate and install these components is also uncontrollable. Now, each individual car itself, it'll look fine for that car, but consistency from vehicle to vehicle, you may not have. Now, we had talked about this raised edge on the door panel. Well, they carry this character line through the instrument panel. I don't like when designers do that. It can cause problems. Now, here's the problem that it causes. I'm gonna close the door. When this door panel is installed to the door frame, that panel has some tolerance for its installation. When this door is installed to the hinges and installed to the body, it has tolerance in its installation. When the instrument panel is installed into the vehicle, it has tolerance in its installation. They have designed a feature that is supposed to flow from this surface to this surface, but both of those surfaces are slaves to the body and to the door, which have their own tolerance. Now the problem with that is right here. If I try and extend this line from the door panel to the IP, I open up roughly a 3mm gap on the instrument panel. The door sits more proud or more inboard than the IP. Now we'd have to look on the other side to see if it has the same amount inboard or if maybe that one is actually sitting outboard. In general, this type of a design feature I would strongly suggest they don't do because of these possibilities for error in final assembly. Now I've had this condition before where the OEM plant calls me in on their second or third shift on a Saturday or a Sunday saying, your parts are out of tolerance because they're not building straight in our vehicle. I would have to go and we would measure our parts and say, my parts all measure fine. It is actually the angle of the IP installed in the body. And the OEMs never wanted to admit that anything was their issue. And I would have to hold their hand for a day or 2 days doing a bunch of measurements, in the end for them to just tell me to go away and no solution because that is the design decision that they chose. And I've had to deal with that issue for many years on many different types of vehicles. I never want to do it again. So I hate that design feature. So it's actually getting kind of hard to say that any display is a large central display, just because every OEM wants to outdo each other and they get bigger and bigger and bigger between vehicle. So if I made any claim that there is a large center display, that video would be dated very, very quickly. So I'm not going to talk about the size of the displays anymore. But what I am going to talk about is the frame around the display. Many of these displays are just floating pieces of black plastic. They chose to do this narrow chromed edge. But the other thing is hard 90-degree corners. They're not rounded corners. That is a style decision, and I kind of like it. It does not really make it feel like, all right, this is where I'm going to go back and make a weird statement. Play school, where they have very, very rounded shapes for their cars. This is not a rounded shape. This is more of a sophisticated shape. I like that plainer shape. So then we have our Prindle here, which is just a push down and turn, neutral, reverse, drive. Simple enough. We're not really selecting gears. This is an electric vehicle anyway. This is an interesting shape. We have this clear acrylic, black backing. We can actually partially see through it. There is a light in here, and the light does shine through these windows as well, which is kind of nice. Basically, it's a storage bin, but that's also for your wireless charging. So I can have wireless charging. I have a USB. For me, that ends up just becoming a bin for change and ink pens. The armrest of the center console. This is a very thin cushion, so it's not a big, thick pillow of foam. However, I don't like the grab handle for opening the armrest. You'd expect this to be the latch. It is not the latch. Reaching in farther, this is the latch. This decorative feature here, I don't really know why they decided to make it that shape and make it look like a latch when it is not. I was pulling on that thinking that I was actually stuck, but this is the feature that is actually latching. I do believe that this is a PVC material. PVC has been used in automotive for a very long time. However, I don't like it, and I'm worried that especially for an armrest, that this will degrade over time. I don't know the quality of the material that they chose. It may be the best in the world. I just know from past experiences that these armrests are high wear areas, and it's really a pain in the neck when you have to go into the Tabor testing and all the other validation steps for an armrest. By getting away from the big thick foam pad, they probably have better results for indentation since it's very, very thin. but I'm a mixed bag whether I think I like it or not. When we have passenger airbags in a vehicle, normally we have to weaken the A-surface in some manner for that airbag to deploy. Textiles, since they are a woven material, are normally very difficult to have a clean break for an airbag. Normally what we would do is we would have a sewn seam in a textile. So there would be some sort of a seam that would wrap through here, and that seam would break open when the airbag deploys. It looks like they have created a cut line and they have created a band. Most likely that is a tethered band, so that when an airbag deploys, this would be the area that it would come out. I don't know if that is entirely true, but that is what makes the most sense to me. So in looking at the back of the front seats, the back of the center console, and in the rear seats, quality control in stitching is a problem for me. And when I see all of these puckers and folds, which are happening in different manners across the rear of the front seats, I don't like it. I look at that as being quality control or pattern design issues. I can see it here on both sides, really. There are issues with puckering in the seams, looking a little inconsistent in the headrests. But for a $50,000 vehicle, this may be perfectly fine. Now, looking at the back of the center console, this is where we have our air ducts. Looks like we have heated seats, and we also have some charge ports, air vents. But look at this panel, which is kind of floating over the center console. At first, when I was looking at this, I was thinking, well, maybe there are other options that would fill in on a different panel if this was a different, higher trim level vehicle. But I don't believe that's true. Look at the path of the armrest, how it cycles over this wall. Because it does not just tip up, it tips up and translates over. It has to create this type of a shelf. I just think that it makes this look funny when the armrest is not open because of that condition with the hinge. We've talked about this condition before. This is the tether. There is a metal rod in here which you will hook your child safety seat anchor to. Now, in a lot of vehicles, there will be actually a plastic bezel that snaps in here over top of the rod, creating a big valley or pocket. It's very easy to access. Now, costs. An injection molded plastic bezel is actually really inexpensive. But if I'm just cutting the material, well, that's for free. I'm already cutting the outside, I just cut that at the same time. But the label. If this was an injection molded bezel, the label could be included in the injection mold. But this has to be a separate label that is now heat staked to the back of the carpet. I've been trying to do calculations for cost savings, and having these labels printed and then the heat stake application of attaching those to the carpet, it's almost a wash considering the plastic bezel. So whether you like this look, if this seems smoother and cleaner than having that plastic bezel, I think that's what it comes down to. If it's a wash in cost, but yet I like the clean and simple look better, then this is an option. But if you're a young family and you're going to be using that child seat very, very often, access is an issue in this type of a situation. Well, I like the headroom for me. Buttons for close and lock, single-sided grab handle, a carpeted surface with a storage bin underneath it, small storage bin. Now here's something that I like. This is an EPP foam block, which is expanded polypropylene. These are very often used in hidden storage areas within a vehicle. Sometimes they're also used as structure underneath the rear seats. But I like the fact that they've applied a texture to this upper surface to make it look a little cleaner. Normally, it would just look like a styrofoam cooler, but they've applied a texture to make this look a little cleaner, a little nicer. I like a flexible sunscreen. A couple of vehicles that reviewed, this is actually a hard plastic panel. But again, I don't like the hard plastic panel because it has to be removed from the vehicle. This at least can somewhat stow cleanly. I could take it off, set it aside. I have the room that I need. Talking about some sort of a grocery hook attachment or some sort of a tie down. I like these features. Now, I question whether they're in the right spot, however. Let's say I have a cooler that I'm putting in here and I don't want the cooler to move. Normally, from this position, I would push the cooler up against the back of the seats and I would want to tie down at the front that I would grab, go around the cooler, hold it back. That stops it from moving. But these are very, very rearward. So what am I doing here? If I'm attaching a cable from this side to the other side of the vehicle, well, now I'm taking something and I'm pulling it against the lift gate. Well, then I lift the lift gate and it just pushes it out. So what are my options here? Well, my options here would be holding the lift gate closed. If I had something that was oversized and I was trying to hold this shut, I could tie it to it. But I don't have any type of a feature on the lift gate to do that. So these tie downs here, in my mind, I think they are in the wrong location. I don't see the benefit of using those as a tie down. If I'm hooking a bungee strap between them, it's going straight across the back wall. I can't really secure anything to it. So in this vehicle, there is a sunroof. We have two zones in the sunroof. We have this section of panel separating between the two. And normally when I see that, I would expect there to be an opening portion and a fixed portion, but we don't really have that. This is a solid glass roof. So if you go to a view above the roof, you'll see it's continuous from front to back. There is no separating door or sunroof which is opening up, but we still have two zones inside. There is a movable cover, sunshade. You can see it's all the way back right now. That is one cover that slides through this gap and closes out the rest of the sunroof. I don't know why this feature here is here. Now maybe there is actually some structural beam that is required to go underneath that glass, but normally you don't need anything like that. So I don't know why they chose to have this feature when there is no separation from two different sunroof areas. So sun visor, nice cushy fabric wrap, mirror. But here's a question. Why is this shape in the mirror? And that appears to be a completely separate component because I can see the mirror through this gap. They don't move independently of each other. I don't know why they chose to create that shape and making this a two component when it could have been one. All right, popping out that mirror. It does not translate across its rod. So if I wanted to try and fill the entire door area, I have a separate extending panel. We were trying to figure out the cost of this panel, the slider mechanism, and whether the cost of doing a panel like this is less or more expensive than allowing this sun visor to just translate across the rod. Now the question became, however, if I'm actually using this sun visor, wait a minute. This sun visor, you see how far back this sits in vehicle? Now it seems like it would be fine. It's not. Here's my glass height. All right, there's my glass height. So here's where the sun is coming through. It is hardly covering up anything. Most of it is actually coming into the headliner itself. And it's the same thing for the front forward edge. If I'm tipping this up, that is the only view of the glass that it's blocking. I assume that they decided they had to have the feature, but they didn't really think about where they were putting it and how much of a benefit you were getting from that feature. So, Toyota bZ4X, one ditch the name. The look of the vehicle, I like a few of these shapes. I like the way the light breaks up across these character lines. I wish that we were to review one that was not a black interior. It's easier to see those features. There are many stylized features within the vehicle that were directly a studio decision. Whether those studio decisions make sense. To me, some of them, no, they don't make sense. They chose the feature to have the look without really thinking about what the feature was actually doing. So when you're talking about form over function, they gave a form, but the function, especially for those sun visors, I don't really think works all that well. For a $52,000 vehicle, again, I think that I'm completely out of touch with the market pricing right now. We know how dealerships are really raising the prices. We know how some of the OEMs are trying to raise or lower their prices to try and match it to the market. Whether you're actually getting the features and getting the quality that you think that you are getting for a $52,000 vehicle for this one, I don't know if it's there. Again, this is a fully electric vehicle. Is there a frunk? No, there's not. And I think in some of the other videos, you'll be able to see that. I don't know if I would say that this would be high up in my estimation. We do know that Toyota is going to try to bring in more electric offerings, which they currently do not have as many of. So I look forward to seeing some of those offerings when they do come out. But I think they made a few wrong decisions here. So thank you very much for watching. If you are not subscribed, please do, and have a good day.